Okay, I think we'll get started now. So for today's webinar, it's going to be the first session of our student-led webinar series for this summer. And it's of course hosted by the Wise Youth Foundation. And just before we get started, I want to first preface that today we have Marissa Guo, who will be going over our first session. But for all of these sessions, they're comprised of students. So these webinars, while they are not very professionally led by experts such as professors or like people who are experts in the field, we still, as students, we have researched around 1.5 to 2 weeks prior to today's webinar to fully give you a researched and well-educated presentation of the topic. So for today, Marissa will be going over saving and budgeting for teenagers, and this is really important advice for everyone globally as well, because personal finance is a very important skill that you should really enhance and be able to nurture in your life from a very young age as well. So Marissa will do her very own introduction a bit later, but I also want to let everyone know that today's webinar, the format will be through a 40-minute presentation and then a 20-minute Q&A section. But this time could really readjust itself depending on the situation. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to put them down into the chat box, and then Marissa can either choose to answer it then and there, or we can also save it for the end for the Q&A section. And also feel free to open up your mic during the Q&A section to ask your questions. You're also allowed to open up your camera for further engagement. But yeah, so that'll be the end for my little introduction. And now I'm just going to pass it on to Marissa now, who will begin today's presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today.
All right, thank you, Queenie. So today we're just going to go through a quick introduction to budgeting and saving, why it's important, and a couple tips just to help you overcome a lot of the barriers people face when they're first starting out with personal finance. So I think a lot of us have always heard that, money can't buy happiness, but of course, as we experience life, we begin to realize that money can buy a lot of important things. It can buy new experiences like visiting new countries. It can buy a certain lifestyle you want to live, how you eat, how you dress, and how you spend your daily life. And it can also be used to make large purchases like luxury goods, cars, shelter, which is really important. And basically, sorry for the background noise. What I'm trying to say is that how you spend your money can dictate a very large part of how you spend your life. So, of course, if you want to live a certain way, it's really important to be able to spend your money a certain way as well. And this is where budgeting and saving becomes very important. But first, I'm going to start off with a little introduction. My name is Marissa. I'm a rising sophomore and I currently live in Ontario, Canada. I have a bit of experience with business. I'm part of FBLA, I'm part of DECA. I also do British parliamentary debate and volunteer with multiple non-governmental organizations in my area. And as for budgeting and saving, I handle my household's variable budget because I'm very organized and I just like to have everything under control. And I also handle my own money that I earn. So let's start off with the basics. What is a budget? As you can see here, this is just a definition from Investopedia, but really a budget is just a plan that is based on how much money you're earning, and it basically outlines how much money you should spend and what you should spend it on. And this is really useful because this means you can see where your money goes and what unnecessary expenses you can cut down on. It means you can reach saving goals faster. It means you can pay off your debt faster. And it forces you to consider what to prioritize spending on, basically allowing you to take control of how you spend your money and also what life you're going to live. So now let's just go over a couple of the basics of creating a budget. First is you need to choose a platform to track your budget on. Most people like to use Excel spreadsheets. That's what a lot of people in business classes are taught. And that's also what I use. However, because consistency is a large part of actually keeping a budget and being able to reap the benefits of having a budget, a lot of people also like to use mobile apps, websites, um, just because it's designed specifically for keeping track of your budget. So, of course, using it is a lot more convenient and incentivizes people to actually keep track of their budget on a more regular basis rather than falling behind and just giving up. Um, so these are a couple highly rated apps that people recommend. The first one down here, that's blue, is called You Need a Budget. This has been overall highly rated, and you can use it on multiple platforms, as you can see. Next is called Good Budget, which is, maybe I should use a pointer down here. This is essentially um like a virtual envelope system. So I I'll touch on the envelope system later, but it's essentially where you just allot a certain amount of money to a category and you can track your spending a lot easier. So it's essentially like a virtual envelope system. And finally, this is called Pocket Guard, and it's just really convenient for tracking spending overall. So these are all known for sort of different benefits that they can offer their users. The next step in creating a budget is arguably the easiest, and it's just finding your net income. So this is the income that you take home after the deductions have been made from your paycheck. For example, like employment insurance, income tax, all these things that are mandatory deductions that will be taken away from your gross income. The next step, which is the hardest for people, is estimating your current expenses. There are some expenses that are fixed, which means they don't change each time you pay them. For example, installment plans like paying off your mortgage or paying off your car, it'll be the same amount paid each time as long as you have like a fixed plan. But there are a lot of other expenses you have to account for as well that are variable, meaning they change each time. So, for example, groceries, clothing, these are all things that you'll spend a different amount on each month or each week or each day. So, when it comes to variable expenses, make your best estimate, and this can be changed as you gain more experience and continue adapting your budget. The next step in creating a budget is setting goals based on what you want to achieve. Do you have a certain purchase you want to make? Are you saving up for college? Are you saving up to like buy a car? Are you saving up for a down payment on a house? Do you just want to change
需要
up
我
your
再给你
lifestyle?
吗？哦，
Sorry. Do you want to like change up your lifestyle, invest more into eating healthier, or I don't know, maybe saving up for an emergency fund? These are all things that you might want to consider when you're setting goals and deciding what you want your budget to achieve. And this is the easiest part. Again, you're just setting budgets. So you're going to estimate how much you'll need to pay off each expense and like set a limit for yourself and create that plan. And this is one of the most important parts of having a budget is staying consistent, making sure that you're tracking your progress by keeping all of your receipts, all of your bills, and comparing your spending to your budget. If you're noticing that something doesn't work for you, then you should change it, or you should maybe find a way to find more affordable alternatives to what you're currently overspending on. Now, here are a couple budgeting techniques because that's like a very textbook budgeting method. Here are just some outlines of how you should organize your budget. So the first is the 50-20-30 rule, also known as the 70-20 or 10 rule, depending on the ratios that you want to use. It's essentially where you would spend 50% on needs, 20% on savings, and 30% on wants. So just dividing your net income into balancing between your needs and your wants and also preparing for the future. This should say 70-10-20. So 70% on needs, 10% on savings, 20% on wants. If your net income needs if your net income is maybe smaller and you have a lot more needs that you need to save up for, then you'd probably use the 70-10-20 method instead. This is the envelope system I was talking about earlier. This mainly focuses more on using cash instead of card. Um, and it's mostly used for serious overspenders or people that tend to overspend when they're using a card because you're able to feel and see the exact amount of cash that you're spending. You're more conscious of your spending. So this will allow people to cut down on their spending and really think before they actually make that purchase. This is also good for people that aren't comfortable with technology, but assuming that you're here, you're probably already pretty familiar with how the internet works. So this might not be as relevant for you. This is a value-based budget. It's basically for people who have very specific goals or priorities in mind or have like specific benchmarks that they want to reach. It's essentially where you have to write down how important each expense is and then begin to prioritize them. And this means that you have to consider what to prioritize. And it also allows you to easily cut back on unnecessary spending. So you can like divert your income to what is most important to you and get the most value out of your money. And then finally, this is the pay yourself first technique. This is for people that really need to repay debt which we all eventually will at some point, or are just really are just saving up for a large future event. So for example, if you really need to start saving up for college, you'd probably use this method. Each week or month or on a bi-weekly basis, you would set aside a fixed amount of money for a specific goal, and then you'd create budgets for other expenses accordingly. Next, let's transition into saving. So saving is just putting aside money for future use. It is not the same as investing. Investing actually means that there's like more of a risk and reward, whereas saving is just safely putting aside money for future use. And this has a couple purposes. It could be used to like save up towards a goal, like I already said, paying for university, or any large purchase that you're going to need to make, but it can also be used for an emergency fund. So you have something to fall back on and you have some peace of mind in case anything happens. Because life is unpredictable, it's really important to have a safety net in case something doesn't go your way. And with a budget, you've already done most of the work when it comes to saving because you know how much you want to save, and you also know how you're going to achieve that by potentially cutting back other expenses. However, a lot of people do reach a large roadblock when it comes to saving, and that is impulse spending. Impulse spending is basically deciding to make an unplanned purchase in the spur of the moment. So, have you ever just been in a store and you're planning on buying one thing, but you walk out with like three items? This is called impulse spending. It's caused by temptation. And this is really common, especially now with online shopping. Corporations are getting really, really good at getting your money, even if it contradicts your financial goals. So people feel the need to buy things because they feel like they need it now and they don't really think it through before spending their money. And even though these are usually associated with smaller purchases like clothing or even food, these always build up over time. So over the year, it can build up to even thousands of dollars. Here are a couple ways to reduce impulse spending. First is creating lists. These are from like the most basic to more extreme um, ways to stop impulse spending. So first is setting up lists. When you want to buy something, make sure to go create lists before you go shopping. And that way, you know, you have a clear image of what you need to buy in mind, which can keep you from going off the path and buying things that don't align with your financial goals. The next thing you should do is set yourself up for success. So stay away from the stores that you know you're likely to impulse buy from, and also make online shopping less convenient. If you can, don't save your credit card information on sites you don't think are necessary to buy from. So that way, it creates an extra obstacle for you to overpass when you're trying to buy things that might not be necessary. Um, and the next technique is the 30-day rule. So this is a more extreme technique. It's whenever you want to buy something, you should wait 30 days before revisiting the idea, specifically a want. Obviously, if it's a need, then you should just buy it. But if it's something you want and you don't think is necessary and it probably doesn't align with your financial goals, you should wait 30 days before you actually make that purchase. If you forget about it, it probably wasn't that important. Or you might have changed your mind within those 30 days because you realized that it wasn't necessary for you to live a fulfilled life. And the final and probably the most extreme technique to stop impulse spending on this list is the no spend month. It's essentially a month where you only buy essential items and you have very strict parameters for yourself. And this is really beneficial to people who find that they really struggle with impulse spending and they overspend a lot and don't make a conscious effort to stop spending because it forces them to become less reliant on buying non-essential items. It forces people to research and discover free alternatives to what they might normally splurge on. And it's useful even after you end your no spend month because you know free activities that you can do instead of just wasting your money. And it also leads you to reflect on your reliance on spending impulsively, maybe questioning why do you do this? Is there a specific reason or motivation that you have? And that being said, once you can overcome impulse spending, saving becomes pretty easy because you're just sticking to a plan and you're able to achieve those goals that you've set for yourself a lot faster. So that being said, that is basically my little introduction to budgeting and saving. It's a pretty straightforward process, but as long as you stick to it and stay consistent, you're able to achieve super large things with it and it will allow you to live that life that you want to live. So are there any questions or something you want to learn more about?
Yeah, okay. So now we're just gonna move on to the Q&A section. So thank you, Marissa, once again for that little intro to budgeting and saving. This is of course very basic, and of course once you get more into like when you get older, you're gonna have to really work on both like financial statements and it gets more complicated. However, for students and children like ourselves, it's important to first know the basics, of course. So that's why this is just a quick introduction. So that presentation was a little bit shorter than what we expected it to be, but that's totally okay if we end today's webinar a bit early. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box. But I think because people are still kind of thinking about it, brainstorming, I'm just gonna like give a few like filler questions from Marissa right now to just begin a discussion. So like Marissa, like you talked a bit about some budgeting strategies and rules that you explained a few of them, just like like which ones do you personally use in your daily lives?
Yeah, so for my budgeting technique, I would say because I'm obviously a minor and I don't pay for my rent and I don't have to buy my own food and clothes. Most of my money definitely goes into either savings or spending it on wants. So I would probably use a variation of the 50-20-30 rule, except for me, it looks more like 30 to 70, where 30% goes towards my wants and 70% goes to my savings, simply because I have the luxury of not having to rely on my own income to provide for myself. I take advantage of that by building up an emergency fund for the future and putting it in a savings account so it can earn interest over time and accumulate. So hopefully by the time when I actually do need the money, I'll have enough to handle any situation that might be thrown at me. So I definitely recommend definitely starting a savings account at this age is essential simply because interest compounds. So the earlier you start it, the better. And that's really important for when you're like in your 20s and you might get into a lot of debt or you might lose your job, for example. You need to have some sort of savings account started up so you can at least get started on accumulating that interest and being prepared for the future.
Yeah, okay, that sounds great. And just like a follow-up question, because it just kind of came to my mind, like you talked about needs versus wants, especially for like
Mhm,
children, I feel like for teenagers, it's difficult for us to differentiate between what's a need and what's a want. So would you give any advice
mhm.
for those who like kind of overspend on their wants and how they should like budget in that aspect?
Yeah, so I do think needs are obviously the first priority, but a lot of us are lucky enough that our needs are already being met. So when it comes to wants, you should really be careful about what you're spending your money on and whether if the want is bringing value to your life. So of course, it's your decision what you choose to spend your money on, but just so you don't end up regretting overspending what you could have spent on something of more value, I would really recommend going through like your past expenses and things that you've already spent money on and considering why did you buy that and if it actually brought value into your life, just so you can see what items bring the most value into your life. For example, if you really like clothes and it does bring you a lot of value into your life and you wear like the same clothes every single day for long periods of time, then it will bring a lot of value to your life and you can say this is like a valuable want, this can be a priority for me when I'm spending my money. Whereas some purchases that you impulse bought and didn't really plan out um, won't bring as much value into your life and you'll end up regretting it later. So it's important to actually analyze your spending and figure out what wants actually are important to you and bring value into your life, because in my opinion, if you don't spend your money wisely, you'll end up regretting it in the future, and that's not a feeling that any of us want to have.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree with that answer. And just kind of going along that as well, because I don't think anyone currently has any questions in the chat. So I'll just like continue on with the discussion so that hopefully we can get some
Mhm.
more ideas going around and people can of course learn from this discussion as well. So do you think like it's beneficial to set financial goals within your budget?
Could you please like elaborate on that thought?
It's just like of course the first step to like having like to be like proficient in personal finance, it's to
Mhm.
actually have goal setting and to be able to know what you want for the future. So do you think it's beneficial
Mhm.
for teenagers to kind of like have that integrated within their budget to first, of course, start with what they want for the future for their financial goals, and then that could is kind of like what shapes their budgeting and saving?
Yeah, definitely. I think that people's goals are determined by their current situation. So, of course, it's important to have goals just to give yourself a sense of direction and feel like your budget is actually giving you the benefits that you want it to be giving you. But even if you don't really have a specific financial goal in mind, I would just recommend saving as much as you can because if you don't have a goal in mind, that likely means that you don't really have a pressing issue or something like something specific that you want to save up for. So in that case, just build up an emergency fund, like I said, because we're all still young. Like we might not have a very specific financial goal in mind. We might not want to like be saving up for a down payment at this time, but it's still good to just get savings going. And instead of spending them all on, you know, wants that you have right now, you should probably consider saving most of it for the future and needs that you'll have to attend to. So I would say even though it's really good to have financial goals that are like very specific, if you are a bit lost and don't have those goals in mind, you should just focus on saving as much as you think you can without like sacrificing um important experiences from right now.
Hmm. Yeah, of course. I totally agree with that one as well. And another question that I think I have, and it's also very beneficial for people who are probably in high school and probably going to go off to college soon. Just like
Yeah.
I because of course you're in high school as well, you probably don't have a lot of experience with this, but like if you have anything to say about this, that would be also great. So like how do you think it's possible for like especially university students to balance saving while also having to pay off like debt, such as like student loans and other
Mhm.
expenses that is kind of a necessity, but it's also like a very high amount that kind of makes it a little bit hard for them to save for the future.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, student loans are a huge problem that most people have to face at some point. How people usually pay them off is through an installment plan. So there's a fixed payment that they'll have to make um, over the course of like a period of time. So typically, once they get out of school, they'll already have like a somewhat stable income, hopefully, and they'll be already having a larger income because of their degree. So it'll be easier for them to pay it off because they have a higher capacity to do so. But what I would recommend is if your net income isn't large enough to really cover that expense comfortably, I would use the pay yourself first budgeting technique that I talked about, which was basically setting aside a fixed amount of money and then budgeting around that, just so you already have a set idea of what you know you need to pay out. And then you can sort of adapt your lifestyle just to ensure that you're still meeting your needs and maybe sacrificing some of your wants, but paying off that debt that you know is a pressing issue that you need to take care of.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, great tips there. And just kind of ending it on this note, I think like one of the most important parts within budgeting, especially for younger children, is the motivation to do so. Like if you really want
Mhm.
to have clothes or something that is clearly a want, it's difficult for teenagers especially to put that down and think more so about their budgeting plan. So do you have any just like motivational tips or anything that can help them stay motivated towards their budget and saving plan?
I definitely still think it's important to attend to your wants sometimes. Like, it's good to treat yourself and go out with friends and have a day at the mall. But even then, I still think it's important to put a cap on it. So you're probably not gonna wanna, like, write out a list of every item you're gonna buy at Aritzia, but if you are gonna go out shopping or go out spending a day, account that into your budget just so you can keep track of your expenses. Take home the receipt, and if you're going out shopping, then set, like, a budget limit for that day, just so you can know that you're still on track towards a future that you want, that you feel comfortable in, without feeling like you have to restrain yourself that much. And because we all likely like we rely on our parents, it shouldn't be too much of a sacrifice. Um, and another thing I just want to note is that if you spend too much, you likely won't feel that well. It's like how you if you watch too much TikTok, for example, right? You get overstimulated because it doesn't feel special anymore. I think it's the same with spending. If you overspend, when you buy new things, you don't get the same amount of dopamine. You don't get as like the same amount of value and happiness as you would if you only bought like one thing every couple of months. So I think balance is really key. Make sure that you're not just going shopping every single week, but definitely attend to your wants just to make yourself like just to like give yourself that dopamine boost and hang out with friends and still have fun.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah, that sounds amazing and great advice once again. And I think today maybe like people don't have that many questions because of just it's very some basic ideas.
Yeah, it's a
So
very
that
straightforward topic.
yeah. So like it's great that we still had that discussion. So hopefully it answered maybe some questions or uncertainties that other people had. So I think although we're kind of finishing it like earlier than what we expected it to be, it's totally okay because this is just the introduction to the series. Just before we end today's webinar, I just want to quickly let everyone know that this series is going to be running throughout the summer and it's going to be weekly unless there's something that occurs, but of course, everyone will be notified of this beforehand. So I want to notify everyone right now, for those who are currently in this webinar, that for next week's meeting, it will be held on Sunday instead of Saturday. And then it will all be posted both on the website, the Instagram, and the WeChat group chat. This information will be sent out to everyone prior to the webinar, of course. So just to let everyone know, it'll be on Sunday, not Saturday, so that everyone is aware of this. And yeah, so if you guys have any further questions about either the series or anything personal questions you have for Marissa, you could totally just DM us on Instagram, email us, or you can just send something on our website and we'll totally receive that and we'll try to get a reply as soon as we can. But yeah, so I think that will conclude today's first session of the student-led webinars. Once again, I just want to thank Marissa so much for starting out this series with a really strong bang, and that this introduction to budgeting was of course very important for everyone. So I hope those who are here today learned a lot. I'll also be sending the recording out on the website. So for those who weren't able to attend, you guys can just send it out to your friends as well, because of course, this is a very important topic once again. So yeah, so I think I'll just end today's webinar here. I want to thank everyone for coming today and stay tuned for further information. So thank you everyone, and thanks Marissa.
Thank you, Queenie.